Chapter 1. The Battlefield of Shadows. The acrid stench of burnt metal and charred flesh permeated the thin atmosphere of Zeloth Prime. The distant sun cast long, twisted shadows across the war-ravaged plains, where the remnants of two mighty armies lay scattered like forgotten toys. The once proud banners of the Zelothian vanguard fluttered weakly in the breeze, their colors muted by blood and ash. Amidst the carnage, Sergeant Marcus Hale of Earth's 7th Expeditionary Corps moved like a specter, his eyes scanning the desolation for signs of life or death. It had been 3 days since the ceasefire had been declared. 3 days of silence, save for the distant groans of the wounded and the mournful cries of scavenger beasts circling overhead. The humans had won this battle, though at a cost so steep it felt hollow. Marcus had stayed behind under the pretense of securing supplies, but the truth was simpler. He couldn't bring himself to leave the field without ensuring there were no survivors on either side. His boots crunched over shattered armor plating and splintered bone as he approached a cluster of smoking wreckage. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the ozone bite of discharged plasma. He knelt beside a fallen Zelothian warrior, his alien body crumpled in a posture of defiance even in death. Marcus had learned to respect these beings in the crucible of war. They were fierce, disciplined, and unyielding qualities he had admired even as he fought against them. A faint sound drew his attention, cutting through the oppressive silence like a knife. It was barely audible, a low, guttural groan that could have easily been mistaken for the wind. Marcus froze, his rifle swinging to bear as his eyes scanned the wreckage. The sound came again, this time more distinct, ragged breath followed by a muffled curse in a language he didn't fully understand but had heard enough times to recognize. He followed the noise, his heart pounding as he picked his way through the debris. Behind a jagged outcropping of scorched metal, he found her. A Zelothian warrior, her bronze skin dulled by dust and blood, lay sprawled amidst the wreckage. Her armor, once a gleaming testament to her rank and valor, was now a battered and broken shell. Her right leg was gone, severed at the knee in a jagged, smoking wound that still oozed a sickly green ichor. Her eyes snapped open as he approached, burning yellow orbs that locked onto him with a mix of hatred and defiance. She reached for a blade at her side, but her hand trembled too much to grip it. "Stay back, human," she spat, her voice raw and guttural. "I don't need your pity." Marcus ignored her, his gaze fixed on the wound. He had seen enough battlefield injuries to know she didn't have much time. The blood loss alone would kill her if the infection didn't claim her first. "You don't need my pity," he said evenly, setting his rifle aside and kneeling beside her. "But you do need my help." She tried to push him away, her movements weak and uncoordinated. "Why? So you can parade me around as your trophy? Save yourself the trouble and put a bullet in my head." Marcus pulled a medkit from his pack, his hands steady despite the venom in her words. "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have come over here. Now hold still, or this is going to hurt a lot more than it has to." She glared at him but lacked the strength to resist. Marcus worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced precision as he applied a tourniquet to her thigh. She hissed in pain but bit back a scream, her pride refusing to let her show weakness in front of a human. "What's your name?" he asked as he cleaned the wound, trying to distract her from the pain. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing as if trying to decide whether to answer. Finally, she said, "Vekara Ornath, captain of the Zelothian vanguard." "Marcus Hale," he replied, his tone neutral. "Sergeant, Earth's 7th Expeditionary Corps." Her lip curled in a sneer. "And what does an Earthling sergeant hope to gain by saving a Zelothian captain?" Marcus shrugged, securing the tourniquet and reaching for a painkiller injector. "Maybe I just don't like leaving people to die." "People?" she scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you even see me as a person, human?" He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Do you?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She said nothing, her fiery eyes searching his face for some hidden agenda. Whatever she saw there must have surprised her, because she finally stopped resisting, her body sagging against the wreckage as exhaustion overtook her. Marcus finished his work in silence, his mind racing with questions he didn't have time to ask. Why was she still here? Had her own people abandoned her? Or was she the lone survivor of her unit? And what would happen if the Zelothians found out he had saved one of their own? He pushed the thoughts aside as he hoisted her onto his shoulder, her weight surprisingly light for someone of her stature. She didn't protest, though her body tensed at the contact. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice weary but sharp. "Somewhere safe," he replied, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. "For now, let's focus on keeping you alive." Chapter 2. The Path of Shadows. Marcus trudged through the wasteland, Vekara slung over his shoulder. Each step was a battle against the shifting sands of Zeloth Prime and the weight of his own decision. The desolation stretched endlessly before him, a graveyard of twisted metal and fallen warriors. The eerie silence was broken only by the occasional groan of the wind, which carried faint echoes of distant skirmishes. Vekara stirred, her body tense against his. "Put me down, human," she growled, her voice carrying a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. "You can barely keep your eyes open," Marcus replied, his tone steady but firm. "You need rest, and you need medical attention. Neither of those things will happen if I leave you here." "You're a fool," she spat, though the venom in her voice was muted by her weariness. "My people will see your actions as treason. Yours will see them as betrayal. You gain nothing by saving me." Marcus adjusted his grip, his arms protesting the strain. "I didn't save you for political points or a pat on the back. I saved you because leaving someone to die, especially someone who fought as hard as you, isn't something I can live with." Vekara fell silent, though her piercing yellow eyes burned into him. Marcus could feel her suspicion, her struggle to reconcile his actions with the brutal reality of war. He didn't expect her to understand hell, he barely understood it himself, but the decision had been made. There was no turning back now. A reluctant alliance. By the time Marcus found shelter, the twin moons of Zeloth Prime had risen, casting a cold, pale light over the wasteland. He carried Vekara into a dilapidated structure, likely an abandoned outpost from a bygone era. The walls were scorched, and the air was thick with the stale scent of decay, but it offered protection from the elements and from prying eyes. Marcus gently laid Vekara on a makeshift bed of scavenged blankets and leaned against the wall, catching his breath. She watched him warily, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. Despite her weakened state, she radiated a predator's intensity, like a cornered beast ready to strike. "You should rest," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "I'll rest when I'm dead," Vekara shot back, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "Suit yourself," he replied, rummaging through his pack. He pulled out a ration bar and tossed it to her. "Eat. You'll need your strength." She caught it, but made no move to open it. Instead, she scrutinized him with a look that could cut through steel. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice low and sharp. "You could have left me to die like everyone else. No one would have blamed you." Marcus met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Maybe that's the problem," he said after a long pause. "Too many people are willing to walk away and pretend they did nothing wrong. I'm not built that way." Vekara snorted, though there was a hint of grudging respect in her eyes. "Humans are strange creatures. You fight like savages but act like saints. It's no wonder the galaxy fears you." "And what about you?" Marcus countered. "You fight like demons and hold grudges like gods. But here you are, relying on a human to keep you alive." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Instead, she opened the ration bar and took a cautious bite, her expression betraying nothing. Marcus couldn't tell if she was sizing him up as an enemy, an ally, or simply a means to an end. A dangerous proposition. As the hours passed, Vekara's strength began to return, though her leg remained a glaring reminder of her vulnerability. Marcus fashioned a crude splint to stabilize her movements, using parts scavenged from the outpost. He worked in silence, his mind racing with plans for their next move. The war might have paused, but Zeloth Prime was far from safe. Patrols, scavengers, and rogue factions roamed the wasteland, and neither of them could afford to be found. "We can't stay here long," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "This place is too exposed." "And where exactly do you plan to take me, human?" Vekara asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. "There's an old evac point about 20 clicks from here," he replied. "If we can make it, we might find a shuttle, or at least a signal beacon." "And then what?" Do you plan to hand me over to your superiors as a prisoner of war? Or perhaps you think your people will welcome you with open arms after aiding the enemy?" Marcus didn't flinch at her words, though they cut deeper than he cared to admit. "I don't know," he admitted, "but sitting here waiting to die isn't an option." Vekara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You're either the bravest human I've ever met," she said finally, "or the dumbest. Either way, I'll follow for now." Marcus nodded, though he knew her cooperation was as fragile as the truce between their races. Trust was a luxury neither of them could afford, but survival had a way of forging alliances in the unlikeliest of places. The journey begins. The next morning, they set out under the cover of darkness. Vekara moved with a grim determination, leaning heavily on the makeshift crutch Marcus had fashioned. Her pace was slow, but her resolve was unshakable. Marcus walked beside her, his rifle at the ready, his senses heightened for any sign of danger. Their journey was a study in contrasts. Marcus relied on his training and survival instincts, scanning the horizon for threats and plotting their course with military precision. Vekara, despite her injury, exuded an air of unshakable confidence, her warrior's pride refusing to let her show weakness. As they trudged through the wasteland, they encountered the remnants of war craters carved into the earth, charred skeletons of vehicles, and the occasional body, human and Zelothian alike. Each sight was a stark reminder of the brutal conflict that had brought them together, and of the countless lives that had been lost. "We're not so different, you know," Marcus said as they passed a burned-out Zelothian tank. Vekara snorted, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? That we're just two sides of the same coin?" "Maybe," he said, his tone thoughtful. "But standing here, looking at all this, I don't see sides. I just see people who died fighting for something they believed in." She didn't respond, though her expression softened ever so slightly. For the first time, Marcus thought he saw a glimmer of something beyond her warrior's facade, something almost human. A fateful encounter. As night fell, they stumbled upon a small encampment of scavengers. The group, a motley collection of humans and Zelothians, eyed the pair with suspicion and thinly veiled hostility. Their leader, a grizzled human with a cybernetic arm, stepped forward, his gaze lingering on Vekara. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice laced with malice. "What do we have here? A human and a crippled Zelothian. Quite the odd couple." "We're just passing through," Marcus said, his hand resting on his rifle. "We don't want trouble." "Trouble?" the man said with a cruel smile. "Oh, I don't think you're in a position to avoid it, soldier boy." The tension was palpable, the air heavy with the promise of violence. Marcus glanced at Vekara, who met his gaze with a slight nod. Despite their differences, they understood one thing. Survival often demanded unity in the face of greater threats. As the scavengers closed in, Marcus raised his weapon, his voice calm but firm. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Chapter 3. Allies Among the Ashes. The scavengers' leader, the man with the cybernetic arm, gestured to his group to circle Marcus and Vekara. There were 8 of them in total, 5 humans and 3 Zelothians, all ragged and armed with scavenged weapons that had seen better days. Their makeshift camp, a collection of patched-up tents and rusted equipment, stood in stark contrast to the desolation surrounding it. Vekara shifted uncomfortably on her crutch, her fiery yellow eyes scanning the scavengers for weaknesses. She was barely standing, her prosthetic leg hastily secured with Marcus's ingenuity and scavenged parts. Despite her frailty, she exuded an air of authority that made the scavengers hesitate to underestimate her. "Look at her," one of the scavengers sneered, a wiry human woman with a jagged scar running down her cheek. "She's barely holding herself up. What's the point in keeping her alive?" Marcus tightened his grip on his rifle, his voice cold and even. "She's with me, and we're just passing through. There's no need for this to get messy." The leader chuckled, his cybernetic fingers clicking as he flexed his mechanical hand. "Passing through? Huh? You think you can just stroll into our territory without offering anything in return? You've got 2 choices, soldier boy. Leave the Zelothian, or leave your supplies. Hell, maybe we'll just take both." Vekara straightened, leaning heavily on her crutch. "You're scavengers," she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "Vultures picking at the bones of the dead. You have no right to claim this wasteland as your own. The leader's smile vanished, his expression darkening. Careful, cripple. You might not have a leg to stand on, but you've still got a mouth that can get you killed. Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between Vekara and the scavengers. If you're smart, you'll let us go. We've got nothing you want, and I'm not looking for a fight. But if you push us, you'll regret it. The leader raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Big talk for a guy outnumbered 4-1. You think that rifle's going to save you? Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step forward, his gaze locked on the leader. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with the unspoken promise of violence. For a moment, it seemed as though the scavengers might back down. Then one of them, a burly Zelothian wielding a crude energy mace, lunged forward with a roar. The fight for survival. Marcus moved like lightning, his training kicking in as he sidestepped the attack and brought his rifle up in one fluid motion. The weapon hummed as it fired, a burst of blue energy striking the Zelothian in the chest and sending him sprawling to the ground. The camp erupted into chaos. The scavengers charged, their weapons raised, but Marcus was faster. He fired again, taking down a human armed with a jagged blade. Vekara, despite her injury, swung her crutch like a club, catching one of the attackers across the face with a sickening crunch. "Get behind me!" Marcus shouted, positioning himself to shield Vekara as he continued to fire. The scavengers were relentless, their attacks coming from all sides. Marcus ducked under a wild swing from the cybernetic leader, his rifle coming up to block a second blow from another attacker. The impact jarred his arms, but he held his ground, kicking out and sending the second attacker sprawling. Vekara, meanwhile, had taken up a discarded blade from one of the fallen scavengers. Despite her weakened state, she fought with the ferocity of a cornered beast, her strikes precise and brutal. She cut down another attacker, her yellow eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and determination. The battle was short but brutal. Within minutes, the scavengers lay scattered around the camp, either dead or incapacitated. The leader, clutching a deep gash in his side, glared up at Marcus and Vekara from where he had fallen. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice weak but venomous. "You think you're better than us, but you're just as desperate as we are." Marcus lowered his rifle, his expression hard. "The difference is, I don't prey on the weak." Vekara limped forward, her blade still dripping with blood. "Leave," she growled, her voice low and menacing. "And if I see you again, I won't be so merciful." The leader hesitated, his gaze flicking between Marcus and Vekara. Finally, he stumbled to his feet, motioning for his remaining comrades to follow. They disappeared into the darkness, their threats echoing in the distance. An uneasy alliance. As the scavengers vanished, Marcus turned to Vekara, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than before. She wiped the blood from her blade, her breathing heavy. "I've had worse," she replied, though her trembling hands betrayed her bravado. Marcus nodded, respecting her resilience. "We should move. This place isn't safe anymore." Vekara hesitated, her gaze lingering on the bodies of the scavengers. "Why didn't you kill them all?" she asked, her tone curious rather than accusatory. "Because they're not the real enemy," Marcus said simply. "They're just trying to survive, like the rest of us." Her yellow eyes narrowed, as if she were trying to puzzle him out. "You're a strange one, human. Most of your kind would have slaughtered them without a second thought." "Maybe I'm not like most of my kind," he replied, offering her his arm for support. She stared at him for a moment, then reluctantly accepted, leaning on him as they began their journey once more. A glimpse of humanity. As they walked, Vekara found herself studying Marcus in a new light. He was unlike any human she had encountered before, calm, compassionate, and unshakably determined. She had been taught to see humans as ruthless conquerors, but Marcus defied every expectation. "You risked your life for me," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Why?" Marcus didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said at last. "And because maybe, just maybe, saving one life can make a difference in all this madness." Vekara fell silent, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite articulate. For the first time since the war began, She wondered if peace was truly possible, if it was just a naive dream. A dangerous road ahead. The evac point was still miles away, and the journey ahead was fraught with peril. Patrols, scavengers, and the unforgiving terrain of Zeloth Prime loomed like shadows over their path. But for the first time, Marcus and Vekara found themselves united by a fragile bond, a shared determination to survive. As the first rays of dawn broke over the wasteland, they pressed on, their steps heavy but resolute. In the distance, the faint hum of engines echoed across the plains, a reminder that their enemies were never far behind. And so, with the weight of the war pressing down on them, the human soldier and the alien warrior began a journey that would test not only their strength but the very foundations of their beliefs. Chapter 4. The Price of Trust. The first light of dawn crept across the jagged plains of Zeloth Prime, painting the desolate landscape in hues of gray and gold. Marcus and Vekara moved cautiously, their senses heightened as they approached the evac point. Every shadow, every faint sound, carried the potential for danger. The war might have paused, but its ghosts lingered, haunting the survivors with relentless persistence. The evacuation site. The evac point was nestled in the ruins of an ancient Zelothian city, its towering spires reduced to skeletal remains. A faint hum of machinery emanated from within, a remnant of long-abandoned tech. Marcus scanned the area through his rifle's scope, his eyes narrowing as he spotted movement near a collapsed tower. "There's someone here," he said, lowering the scope. "Human, by the look of it." Vekara shifted uneasily on her crutch. "Could be scavengers again. Or someone we can reason with," Marcus countered, though his grip on his rifle tightened. As they approached, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was a man, clad in battered military armor that bore the insignia of Earth's forces. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and he carried a plasma rifle slung over one shoulder. He regarded Marcus and Vekara with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "You're a long way from home, Sergeant," the man said, his voice rough and weary. "And you've got strange company." Marcus lowered his weapon, but didn't let go of it. "We're not here to cause trouble. Just looking for a way off this rock." The man's gaze shifted to Vekara, his expression hardening. "A Zelothian? You've got guts bringing her here." "She's not a threat," Marcus said firmly. "She's injured, and she's with me." The man snorted, shaking his head. "You're either brave or insane. Maybe both." He gestured for them to follow. "Come on, let's get you inside before someone less friendly shows up." Tensions rise. The man, who introduced himself as Corporal Jared Lorne, led them into the ruins. Inside, the remnants of a makeshift camp were visible tattered tents, a sputtering generator, and a few scattered crates of supplies. Two other survivors were there, a wiry woman with a bandaged arm and a young soldier barely out of his teens. Both eyed Vekara warily. "You've got some explaining to do, Sergeant," Jared said, crossing his arms. "Why are you protecting one of them?" Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "Because leaving her to die would have been wrong. She's not the enemy right now, she's just another survivor." The younger soldier scoffed. "You think she'd do the same for you? These bastards would slit your throat the second your back was turned." Vekara bristled but remained silent, her grip tightening on her crutch. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "She's here under my protection. If you've got a problem with that, take it up with me." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Finally, Jared sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Fine, but if she steps out of line, she's your responsibility." Marcus nodded, and Vekara exhaled softly, though she said nothing. For now, they had a place to rest, but it was clear that trust was in short supply. A plan in motion. Over the next few hours, Marcus and Vekara worked alongside the others to prepare for their departure. The evac point's beacon had been damaged, its signal barely strong enough to reach low orbit. Jared explained that a nearby Zelothian outpost contained a stronger transmitter, but it was heavily guarded. "We've got one shot at this," Jared said, spreading a crude map across a crate. "We sneak in, send the signal, and get out before they realize what's happening." "And if they catch us?" the young soldier asked nervously. "They won't," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We'll move fast and stay quiet." Vekara studied the map, her yellow eyes narrowing. "I know this outpost," she said. Its defenses are designed to repel large-scale assaults, not small infiltration teams. If we move at night, we can exploit the blind spots. The others hesitated, clearly uncomfortable taking advice from a Zelothian. But Marcus nodded. Good. We'll need every advantage we can get. The infiltration. Night fell, and the team set out, their movements silent and deliberate. Marcus led the way, with Vecra close behind. Despite her injury, she moved with surprising agility, her warrior's instincts kicking in. There, she whispered, pointing to a gap in the patrol routes. That's our way in. They moved quickly, slipping past the defenses and into the heart of the outpost. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of machinery and the faint scent of ozone. Marcus led the group toward the control room, his rifle at the ready. Keep quiet, he whispered. We don't want to draw any attention. The control room was smaller than expected, its walls lined with glowing consoles. Jared immediately set to work, calibrating the transmitter while Marcus and Vecra stood guard. We're almost there, Jared said, his fingers flying over the controls. Just a few more minutes. But those minutes felt like an eternity. The faint sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. Contact, Marcus whispered, his rifle snapping up. The final stand. A squad of Zelothian soldiers burst into the room, their weapons raised. For a brief moment, there was silence, then chaos erupted. Marcus fired first, his shots precise and lethal. Vecra lunged forward, her blade flashing as she cut down one of the attackers. The room became a blur of motion and noise. Marcus moved with the efficiency of a seasoned soldier, his rifle never missing its mark. Vecra fought with a ferocity that belied her injury, her blade carving a path through the enemy. Jared shouted from the console. The signal's sent. We need to move now. Marcus and Vecra covered the retreat, their movements perfectly synchronized despite their differences. As they fled the outpost, the sound of alarms blared behind them, a stark reminder of the danger they had just escaped. A hard-won victory. By the time they returned to the evac point, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. A faint rumble filled the air as a shuttle descended from the sky, its engines kicking up clouds of dust. Jared turned to Marcus and Vecra, his expression grim but grateful. You did good out there, he said. Both of you. Vecra raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? Don't get used to it, Jared replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. As the shuttle's ramp lowered, Marcus turned to Vecra. This is it, he said. You ready? She hesitated, her fiery eyes meeting his. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. But I owe you my life, Marcus Hale. For whatever that's worth. He smiled, extending a hand. It's worth more than you think. She took his hand, her grip firm despite the weight of their shared struggles. Together, they stepped onto the shuttle, leaving the wasteland and the war behind. Epilogue. In the months that followed, the story of the human soldier and the alien warrior spread across the galaxy. Rare tale of hope and unity in a time of chaos. Though their paths would diverge, their bond remained a reminder that even in the darkest of times, compassion and courage could bridge the divide between enemies. And somewhere, on a distant battlefield, a human soldier and a Zelothian warrior remembered that moment and knew they had changed the galaxy in ways they could never fully understand.